guys for coming, through the roadworks, etc. I appreciate that it's kind of a little bit more difficult to get here. That's cool. So yeah, I'm James Rabbitt. I'm going to provide you with a bit of a sense of the story of starting up for learning over the last few years. So a little bit about me. I'm 23. I work as a software developer at NIB Health Funds in their digital and emerging business delivery unit. I grew up in Newcastle. I finished school in 2013 and I've been sort of studying and volunteering and interning and then getting a job in that time, and also starting up broader learning. So about broader learning, or really what I like to call is why broader learning. So why did we actually start up and what do we do? So when Mitch and I were in our first couple of years of uni, in 2014 and 15, we volunteered through a couple of student societies through the uni, through a society called Rabbitt as well, and we visited 52 schools across New South Wales teaching coding and robotics. And in those 52 schools, we amassed about 355 hours between tours, and we visited all these schools and we taught these core concepts to mostly girls and a few boys in primary and high school, and we worked a lot with teachers as well. And when we worked with those teachers, there were these three common themes that we kept experiencing, which were, we want STEM, so there was a huge appetite for STEM, and STEM is a huge buzzword now, and it has been for years, but back in 2014 and 15, it was I guess a little bit more emerging, and schools didn't even have a start on it. So there was a huge appetite for that. There was the fact that STEM was hard to get started for a school, so at the time and even now, it was hard for schools to find funding to invest in that, and they didn't know where to start. And also that the resources and implementation were hard to experiment with and expensive to experiment with, and schools would struggle. So this sort of scenario we would see time and time again was that one or two teachers or maybe an executive staff member at a school would pick up STEM or STEAM, depending upon which one they like, and they would go and they would apply for funding, and they would purchase, let's say, $5,000 worth of resources, which realistically only translates to one set of robots for one class. And they would maybe run robotics with each class for one term a year. So it was kind of really expensive for them to get started. There was only really one or two people championing it, and these resources would kind of sit on the shelf for most of the time that they were sort of purchased for. And then this kind of horrible thing kept on happening where teachers that were on the forefront of this would end up getting poached, or they would end up moving on to another school where they were better set up to do STEM. And so you'd visit schools as volunteers where you only really had the bandwidth to do 1 hour or 1 day in a school, and the school would ask you, hey, we've got all these amazing resources, can you come back every week for the rest of the year and teach this, or help us teach this? And as a volunteer sort of group, we didn't really have the capacity to do that. So that was kind of the idea that spawned broader learning. So we deliver quality STEM learning programs. So the idea is, I guess the emphasis is on the program idea. So we come back on a repeated basis. We don't really like doing the one-off sort of outreach workshop. They're a dime a dozen. I'm not saying they're not impactful. They're really great, and it's a really great way to intro, but we wanted to sort of differentiate ourselves from that outreach capacity that lots of public education institutions do. We also select and purchase resources centrally. So where a school was previously purchasing, 50 schools were purchasing 50 sets. If we can work with 50 schools, which is, I guess, a goal, we can purchase one set and leverage that and maintain them centrally. So we don't have to worry about them not being charged from week to week or maintenance issues. We also, as a company, have pretty close relationships with our providers, whether they be in Australia or international. They're pretty happy to work with us because they know that we're in a school demonstrating their stuff, so maybe the school wants to buy it afterwards, but they also work with us to get feedback on their resources and say, okay, maybe we can improve that. And we also conduct broad-scale research and development. So where a school had to invest not only money, but they also had to invest time, and they would experiment once a year, and maybe that entire cohort of students that experienced the coding or robotics program didn't get the best experience, and that's kind of expensive in terms of not money, not time, but actually their experience, because they're gone now. We, I guess, try to hit that off because we deliver our programs 10 times a week rather than once a term. We refine and repeat our program delivery often, so as kind of said, we have the opportunity to do it quite often. It's really the idea of centralising something as a service is the core sort of value proposition we have. So our core business is our learning programs, like 1 to 2 hours a week for 10 weeks in a term, and we have 2 or 3 staff of our team visiting a school on that basis, and with around roughly 20 students. So that's kind of the core sort of bread and butter that we do. We also do these holiday workshops where we try to, provide 4 touch points throughout the year. We provide like introductory, intermediate, advanced, continuous, that kind of thing, where students can flow on throughout the holiday. So if they don't want to do something, or if their school doesn't want to do something during the term, that's a great way for them to access this kind of stuff. So I have a short video here, which I will play, which kind of provides you with a bit of a sense of our core business.
Broader learning provides a very fun and engaging way for kids from a very young age to be introduced to robotics and programming.
Our robotic learning program allows students to engage with both Lego and Dash robots, which allows them to build robots as well as program different things, act out different stories, for example.
My favorite thing that I've learned in robotics is probably how to code better and how to get the robot to do something without initially moving controls and things like that.
There's been plenty of staff here. That's the first thing I noticed when I came into the classroom to watch what was going on with the robotics. There's always lots of staff to be on hand to help the children learn all about programming and so on, and they're always very knowledgeable too.
I like working with these students because they're creative, they're intuitive, and they really take direction as well as they can, and they want to learn.
My favorite thing it can do is that it can search for things and see if there's things in front of it. If I had a robot, I would probably make it clean my room and enjoy it, but I'm supposed to now.
The broader learning program is a great robotics program, and it's really helped our kids along in learning about both programming and robotics, and it's really hands-on, and everybody's really enjoyed it.
Cool, so that's one of our, purely robotics programs that we deliver at Newcastle Grammar School. So we have, a range of programs at different levels and in different sort of focus areas, but that was one of the first ones we delivered last year. Not going to make you watch it again. So we're also doing, outside of our core business, product research and development. So where I sort of mentioned we work with a lot of best-in-class resources in STEM education. They are awesome and they're amazing, and every school sort of, if you talk to them, they buy one of the same 5 different things. But working with them, for 20 hours a week, every week, we soon find out what, the shortfalls of those resources are. So not that we necessarily think we're going to be the best equipped to develop these products, but we do have a lot of experience using the best-in-class stuff. So we want to use that information that we gather to potentially develop some things that might, improve on those experiences, or at least provide really quality feedback to those regional vendors. We have our experimental business areas, which I'll sort of touch on in a second, and we do these kind of in-kind initiatives as well, so it doesn't really make any financial sense, but they have a really quality educational impact, at least in our opinion. So this is one of those in-kind areas. This is our Student Maker Projects initiative. So we applied for matched funding last year to the Department of Industry, Innovation and Science, I think that's right. And we put forward $7,500 and they matched that 1-for-1. And we've been able to, get 4 groups of 6 students from year 9 and 10 at schools across Newcastle. And we're providing them with a mentor for 20 weeks, so 2 hours a week for 20 weeks over the rest of this year, and $750 in funding per group to go and build something in the STEM area. So it's like project-based learning with a bit of an open-ended, goal. And we wanted to see if that was something that we could do in a more sustainable format. We are still running that at the moment, so this is Zeb High's, Warners Bay and Toronto High Schools and Newcastle Grammar School, and this was them over at Newspace probably 6 weeks ago doing their first sort of ideation workshop. So one of the groups was thinking about doing a whole craft, but they've settled on an electric bike, which is thankfully heaps more attainable. So our team, as part of our startup story, there's myself and Mitch sitting up front here. We're the directors who, run the company. We also have our core education team who run most of our educational programs. So it's George, Kendall, Zoe, Great stuff, and it's studying, I guess, a range of things. So when we first started off, we thought we needed just people who knew how to code. And we learned very quickly it's like solid soft skills, and you can teach that coding and STEM stuff. Great if they have an aptitude, but you can go from there. We also had our student maker project mentors for that in-kind initiative I just mentioned. They're all studying a flavour of engineering, a couple of electronics, a couple of mechatronics, and I guess half bachelor of business. And we have an R&D software engineer, Matt, who works 1 or 2 days a week for us, doing most of our product development stuff. And our education advisor, Mel, who's like a career educator, who advises our team and trains them when they need to be trained. Sorry. So our startup timeline, we started off in 2016, so just a little bit over 2 years ago. And in the first sort of half, it was just sort of me and my original founding partner. And we ran this sort of project-based learning program at a school in Kurrambong. And it was a bit rough and tumble. I'm not going to say it went super well. We didn't have any funding, we weren't a company and all that kind of stuff. But what we did find was that there was a serious appetite for this stuff, even if it wasn't done amazingly. So what's the appetite going to be if it's actually done really well? So we went away, registered a company, bid for our first piece of work, got that piece of work, and then pretty swiftly after we got that first contract, the founding partner exited the company, which is a bit of a rough sort of start that first year. But that's when Mitch kind of really stepped up from helping us out with that project-based learning thing to becoming, I guess, a director and a partner with me. And then in 2017, we started that first piece of work at Newcastle Grammar School. We rocked up for our first lesson on the, I guess it was the first Monday afternoon of term. It was just Mitch and I in a Year 1 classroom with a set of iPads and a set of robots. And we were expecting to have like 18 students, that was what the role said. And we ended up with 48 students on that very first session. So I'm happy to say there's enough time between now and then. That session was a total waste of time. The students, like, they loved it, but it was just, there was no educational value to it. And we went away on the Tuesday afternoon, advertised, and then by Thursday we'd hired 2 more people. So that we ran that sort of program in two programs back to back, or at the same time, sorry. And then that school renewed. In the second half of that year, we took it very easy. Mitch and I were both doing internships at the time elsewhere, and we wanted to make sure that things were sort of scalable. We'd been part of volunteer programs that had gone like gangbusters before, and they very quickly realised that their processes weren't sort of in the right format or the right healthy state to support that growth. So we wanted to go a bit slowly. In term 4, we brought on St. James, St. James and Katara South, and the school was really like welcoming, but they didn't have an expectation that it was going to be that popular. So they like gave us 1 time slot in the week to fill, and we ended up with 3 groups of students, so 3 groups of 20, so 60 students overall. We had to, I guess, hire again to support that. So that was kind of our like lean, mean, I guess, idea, is that we didn't hire people or we didn't buy things, we absolutely needed them. So we ended up with 2 programs running a week, 2 schools running a week with actually like 100 students across them. In this year, we've had both of those schools renew or continue with us. We've expanded to a second campus at Newcastle Grammar School, doing, I guess, the whole K-12 spectrum. We started off at Hillsborough Public School, out of sort of Charlestown. It's actually in Charlestown, which is funny. Doing a program over there, and we've renewed again for terms 3 and 4. And we started off at NGS Hill for filmmaking. So the school has an appetite to do more STEM-based things, so we've sort of expanded out our, I guess, focus areas as we've gone. We've also started at Carrington Public School this term, where we approached them to say, hey, can we use the school hall to do some holiday stuff? And they came back and said, no, but can you run a STEM program for the entire school for an entire term? So we have a team of people there from 8 till 3 p.m. on a Thursday, which is pretty awesome. And then we have student maker projects down the bottom there, which is kind of our in-kind initiative of the year, and we're expanding to, that's a project that I won't go into, we're expanding to 2 schools in term 4 as well. So the sort of challenges we face as part of our story, some pretty solid like learning curves. So lots of people talk about, and there's lots of workshops provided by the government and all that kind of thing in terms of like refining a business model, validating a business model, like lean canvas, all that kind of stuff, and it's awesome. But the stuff that I struggled with the most was, how do I register a company? how do I register a tax file number for that company? How do I log into ASIC to do things for that company? Do we need to register for GST? All that sort of stuff. It was like a huge learning curve for each one of those processes, and it usually took me about 2 weeks or midnight 2 weeks when we were starting off. And we also have noticed that because we work 4 days on other things and work 2 days on this a week, we quite often are doing our sort of work on a Saturday or a Sunday, and ATO is always doing their maintenance on a Saturday and a Sunday. So we always sit down to do our like business activity statement or something, and we have to push it off to a Monday morning. And purchasing insurance, so operating in schools, we needed $20 million public liability insurance to go anywhere and do anything. We approached a bunch of insurance brokers in Newcastle, and they were all like, no way, there's no way that they're going to insure that. And we eventually found one who didn't see an issue with it whatsoever and said that the other ones didn't know what they were doing. So we purchased that insurance, and that's awesome. We just send that certificate off to every school we onboard, and it's ticked that box. And recruiting was a real challenge, so when we started off, we were basically picking people we knew and just saying, hey, can you come work for us? And in the meantime, as we've expanded our team based on the need, like, you know, we actually, it kind of looks like we've gone hiring crazy, but if you look at our sort of roster of workshops that we're running per week, we still have a workshop that doesn't have enough people to cover it. So recruiting was something that we found challenging in terms of initially how do we actually employ people and do it properly, so what are they under, etc. How do we pay them, how do we calculate all their super and that sort of stuff. Mitch really helped with that because I didn't know what I was doing. And also recruiting the right people. So we've interviewed probably 50 or 60 people over the time we've been a company, and our team is 12 at the moment. And I guess our strategy has changed. So what you originally think is going to work in terms of recruiting for your particular kind of company, or for us at least, it was blown out of the water. We also have, I guess, the personal challenges of the co-founder exiting in the first year of the company, and also like work-life startup balance. So as I said, 4 days a week, both of us are working 4 days a week somewhere else, and then 2 days a week on this, and then you've got like 1 day a week theoretically for your life, but it doesn't really work out that way. So trying to keep that balance is a challenge we've faced. Things that weren't so hard for us, this is a bit of a different slide, not to like boast or anything, but just sort of to point out to other people if they're starting a company, you know, things you might not think of. Business-related IT, so like custom forms, enrollments, custom business processes. You know, we explored the idea of having an online store and whether or not we were going to drop ship and building like a lambda function to swap, you know, basically go and grab someone else's stock limits and add them to our database and then keep them synced in a sort of weird way. So stuff like that wasn't so hard to mention because we're both software developers. Also managing fleets of resources, so if you're managing a fleet of STEM resources, for us for example 15 iPads, you want to be able to hand any iPad to any student in any school you go to and say, hey, the app that you want is in the top left of the screen. And it seems like a pretty common sense idea, but if you do that by just manually doing it, the kids are going to move them around, and you're going to spend it at the end of every lesson redoing that sort of stuff. So having it all sort of managed in a way that like you touch an iPad and it really only is a single app iPad, which doesn't seem like value for money, but it is. And also getting started with schools was something that we didn't have that much problem with. So when I say that, I underline getting started because I'm not saying it's easy. I'm saying when we volunteered with schools, we had a lot of experience dealing with the sort of things that they want. So we knew that when we rocked up, they weren't going to ask us about a few things, or they were going to ask us about a few things if they were a public school, but we needed to make sure we provided them with all the paperwork and stuff before we went in and did anything commercial. Ongoing challenges, so all kinds of advice. So you get unsolicited advice, you get solicited advice, and you get both kinds of each. So keep going, don't keep going, sell, exit, make it your job, etc. There's all this advice out there that says like don't start a company unless you planning to exit by year 3. I don't really know. I haven't worked it out yet, obviously. But trying to keep that echo chamber inside your head from, I guess, becoming too much is a challenge. It's something that we still sort of face. Engaging our team with leadership and, I guess, business development stuff. So we have a large team. We have ourselves working part-time. We would rather get these guys that are currently on the payroll who understand our business and understand or share the same values as us to step up and take over some of the project-based stuff that we needed to do, rather than go out to market and hire someone. And that's not always the easiest thing ever, because when you recruit someone specifically to do coding and robotics education in a school, they're not necessarily thinking, I'm going to end up working on like a grant bid or like a grant application, or working with a not-for-profit to see if we can work with them or something like that. But it's something that we, I guess, endeavour to do to make sure that our team doesn't balloon out and become too, I guess, large to handle. Also, public awareness and market perception. So we don't really know exactly, and I'm sure that most startups don't really know exactly where their startup stands in terms of the market or what people think. So we talk to some people and we say, this is what we do. And some people love the idea and say, hey, come to our school. And we talk to some people and we say what we do, and they say that's really gross, I don't like the idea of privatised education, and we don't really think of it as privatised education, but I can understand as how some people might think that. So trying to understand where you fit, and that's, I guess, the first step in terms of trying to, and I don't want to use the word manipulate, but trying to like market to the right groups. That's something that we still, I guess, have a challenge with. And also storage. This sounds like really stupid, but we've been a member at 376, I2N, Hunter Street, for ages, which has helped us with interviewing and meetings and training and all that sort of stuff. But as a company whose part of our core value proposition is to have all the stuff centralised, we have a whole third bedroom. So Mitch and I both have a bedroom at the house we rent, and Broad Learning pays a third of the rent too, because this is the third bedroom that was supposed to be an office for both of us that's now just basically just iPad charging and the boxes of stuff we had. Also, ongoing challenges, I guess part 2, is the education specific challenges, so renewing our content and renewing our resources, but I put an asterisk there because they're really core to our value proposition. So if these two things went away, I'm not saying our business would go away, but it is part of our, I guess, core value to a school. Is instead of them saying, oh, we've got all the resources and we've got the content, and we went in and said, well, we're doing this, and they'd be like, why would we do that? So we're happy with those things to keep going. And also no relevant accelerator or incubator. So there was EduGrowth in Sydney that was sort of running, I guess, incubator programs for companies in our sort of space. And they've decided not to continue that in 2018. Maybe they're coming back next year, not exactly sure. But it kind of, I'm not saying that we would want to go and sign away like a part of our equity in exchange for somebody to tell us stuff we can find online. Ooh, bit rough. But it is, you know, it does inform, I guess, our challenges a little bit. So, how we run our startup is something that I guess I could have mentioned at the start, but I wanted to sort of outline, I guess, our different business areas. So our core business really provides funding and an informed, I guess, idea of the space we operate in. So the core business that we talk about in terms of what brings in the most revenue, that we can then invest in the experimental ideas and use our, I guess, our experience of what does work and what doesn't work and what the pain points are for us and for schools to sort of try to solve some of those problems. So our product development with Matt, for example, that's kind of where all the money goes because we don't really make a profit at the moment. And our initiatives, so sort of our in-kind stuff, which is basically, are we well positioned to do it and is it going to have a solid impact? And if the answer to both of those is yes, we're just going to have a really hard time claiming to not spend money on it. And then what we want to be. So we want to be, I guess, a go-to provider of STEM education in New South Wales, or in Newcastle at least. We want to be a trusted advisor for parents and for schools. We want to, I guess, continue to be a proven and impactful means of delivering STEM content. And we want to maybe be a provider of quality STEM resources, because I put an asterisk on there and I'm saying, well, look, if it doesn't work, I'm happy to have said that that experiment or that bet hasn't paid off and we're going to cut our losses. And we want to be based in Newcastle, so that's something that's core to us. Newcastle's been a great home to us the whole time we've been doing this, and we think that, you know, the city's going through a really great change at the moment. We want to make sure that we don't become one of those startups that gets plucked off to Melbourne or Sydney or somewhere else. So what's next for us? More schools, of course. Continue our product development to see how we go. Maybe experiment it in some of our programs. Refine some of our core business processes, because I guess you expand and then you refine and then you expand again, and we're definitely just continuously doing the expand thing. And we want to expand again to another city. So maybe Sydney, maybe next year, maybe later this year, at some point for sure. So if you're interested in any of that stuff, come and have a chat to us, because we'd love for you to come and work with us, either as a director or, as a staff member or, project officer or something, we'd be more than keen to talk to people who are interested in, working with us. We're not like, go away, it's our baby. So yeah, I guess I've got business cards, come and chat to me at the end. And my unsolicited advice to people is to get a hobby that isn't commercializable and is not related to what you do. So I've started in the last probably 6 weeks doing really, really terrible woodworking, like stuff that just doesn't make sense. Like building stuff in like a pretty nerdy way. I've gone like 3D designing it, and I'm not sure if it's structurally sound, but I'm going to build it. Occasionally it's okay to do something for the business or something that's not exactly necessarily value for money for the company, but relates to the company that keeps you engaged. So I know that I do this sometimes if I'm feeling a bit overexhausted or whatever. I do something that is a nice to have, not a need to have, that I think provides value or some value, but is really, mostly to keep me engaged, so that I can say, yeah, I'm still doing it, I didn't quit. And also hire smart people and get them to tell you what to do. So this is like a butchered Steve Jobs quote, but it's something that I take really, seriously, is that whenever we hire people in our interviews, you look at their CVs, and in the age range that we're hiring in, they're all at uni or finished school, and they all have way better marks than me, like by a huge margin. And I know that academically, that it doesn't say, it's not a clear indicator that somebody's more intelligent or whatever, but I assume they are. And I want them to get to a stage or a comfort level where they can, inform us as directors as to where we need to go, and we can say, yeah, cool, go away and work on it full time for 6 months. And also, the bar moves. So this is something we struggle with still, is how do you celebrate stuff that was really hard 6 weeks or 6 months ago, but you solved now. So it seems like when we do our sort of team feedback surveys and Mitch and I participate, everyone says, yeah, I'm really happy with what we're doing, and Mitch and I say neutral. And what that means is, like, as the steering of the company, we see what we need to do, and then once we've done it, we're not necessarily proud of it. We just say, okay, we've done. Now what can we do to improve it again, because it's still not that great. So find a way to celebrate your work in some way. That's pretty much it. So it's my startup story. If you've got any Q&A or questions, I've got the A. The answers, yeah. So if you want to come and ask me any questions or ask them now, that'd be awesome. Thanks, guys.
I've got a question. Sorry.
Yeah, cool.
How was it initially working with schools, and now how is it before you had like a track record, and now how is it approaching new schools now that you have a track record?
Yeah, sure. So the first major school that we worked with, Newcastle Grammar School, where Mitch and I had some experience with them volunteering and then working with them like consulting. So that was a great like on-ramp.
Okay.
For other schools, when you're onboarding or when you're trying to talk to them as prospective customers, it is definitely difficult. So, and I'm also sensitive to the fact that when you go to a public school, if they see a private school as the customer you worked with, they're more likely to recoil than if you'd actually had no customer at all.
Why?
Because there is this sense that private schools are over-resourced, so that they can access things that you might not be able to access at a public school. But our programs, in our opinion, are actually reasonably accessible. So at Carrington Public School, we approached the school, and I know that they had some concerns about the funding level, and we talked to Orica and we brought our price down by half. So we met them sort of in the middle, and Orica is sort of funding a part of that program for them, but we're also cutting our fee totally in half for them to make it accessible. And the reason we can do that is because it's, back-to-back and scalable. So our award margin on staffing goes down massively. If that makes sense.
Yep.
Sort of to answer your question by digressing. Yep.
I was surprised about the dislike of the privatisation of education, but clearly the company exists because it's not happening in the public sector. Do you have any thoughts on why the education system isn't doing STEM better? I do have to say, I don't have like they're not doing it well because.
we've been to New South Wales government events at the Department of Education in Sydney. We've been to training days in Newcastle at like both public and I guess independent schools, and we see that there are people out there doing a really great job of it. And there's programs that starting up in the Department of Education, like there's one called Share, where they basically bought a bunch of central resources and schools can apply and rent them. So I see that there's this process, but I think it's just a huge system. And I think people are struggling to get that change across the entire school system in a concerted way. And also teachers are time poor. I just don't have the time to go away and have had 10 years of experience coding or whatever, like I mentioned myself. So I think there will always be a space where this is applicable, and that not necessarily education system is eventually going to get there and we're going to be out of work. But I understand that it is a hard change to go through for all of them, if that makes sense.
How involved is a teacher in the curriculum? If a teacher is based in a school, do you take them to another room or do you do it in the classroom?
Yeah, so we can have duty of care for students, so we can provide them with release time that they can go away and work on marking or skill development or whatever else. So most of our after school stuff, they do that. They because you guys are fine. We'll just come back and lock up once you're done. But if it's an in-school program, all the teachers sit in because they want to be exposed to that content. I guess provide for the schools that want it anyway, a scope and sequence of something that they can put into their reporting for the year and say, hey, we met these academic outcomes. And if a school really wants to be involved, they can shape the curriculum. As we sort of mentioned, because of the space we're in, schools are kind of happy to sit back and let us do it and learn from that.
Yeah. All right, thanks, James. Appreciate
Cool.
it.
Thanks so much, guys.